So just kind of like a little introduction. Landon is from Greensboro, North Carolina. He has been in real estate for 7 years. Landon, have you been working with investors all 7 years?
Pretty much. I think the first investor that I worked with, well, I was an investor first. So I guess I worked with myself before I got into real estate, but the first investor transaction that I did was in 2018. And I I'm a numbers person. I'm not really a an emotional transaction person. So after working with that first investor, it really kind of opened my eyes to like this is the type of real estate that I want to do. This is what gives me energy, being able to take a very objective goal and go out and find something that meets that. My very first real estate client, I'm sure everyone has this story. She was a buyer. She was a first time home buyer, limited budget. We found the house though. We're walking through and she's like, I don't like these green walls in the kitchen. And I thought I was just going to quit all real estate altogether right then and there. And then I met investors and I just found like I talked that language a lot more. Like we're here to help them with a much more tangible goal. And while home ownership is really important and I'm really passionate about that too, I I found that it was much easier to be able to take the needs of an investor when you learn to talk their language and go out and find something that meets that. And my experience in working with investors like from day one is this meets the criteria and then they buy it. It was a lot less of all of the subjective, like, and most of the investors I work with never set foot in the properties they buy either, which I really liked that too.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you just kind of when you were talking about like your personality, what is your disc?
I am a high D, high C.
I
They're
see. So yeah,
about
you don't see
even.
that. You don't see that in real estate very often. Um, the DCs. Um, but yeah, that's interesting. And it explains why working with investors is a lot easier. Because so what is your perfect client, like investor client? What do you look for?
My ideal investor is someone that's looking to transact more than 5 deals a year. Um, so they've got to, like, I don't, me personally, and there's a market for it, but I don't work with investors that don't have money, meaning I want to buy a house and I don't have any money to buy it. I want all of these creative financing and everything like that. What I tell those investors is if I find that deal, I'm buying it. So I need to work with someone that has funds. If they don't have to be cash buyers, there's still a lot of opportunities that we have found for people where they can buy it, renovate it, and then refinance out and recycle the cash. But I don't do a ton of first time investors, not because I'm not willing to do green, but in my experience, it has been I want to get into investing. I don't know how to do it and I don't have any money. That's a really dangerous game to play. Just like if you're going to
Mhm.
buy your first house, you have to be able to afford it. And I'm not just talking monthly payment right now. I'm talking like, can you afford the maintenance of the property? What's going to happen if that HVAC goes out? All of those things. But generally, like my rule of thumb is I want to work with investors that have goals to buy multiple properties per year.
Yeah, so thinking of like being maybe a newer agent, when you first started working with investors, where did you find your investors and did you start working with newer investors, if that makes sense?
I the investors I have not closed many transactions with new investors aside from if I could step back to kind of like my profile, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So a brand new investor is going to be a high net worth, high income individual. They need to figure out what they're going to do to lower their tax liability, and they're starting to think about retirement in the form of either cash flow or appreciation. Those are great new investors to have. They make good money. They can afford the mortgage payment if it sits vacant while we're getting it renovated. all of those things. But when I really think back, the new investors were all like they had great jobs, they live out of state. I've got most of the investors that I work with don't live here locally, they're out of state or out of country,
Hmm.
and they're primarily looking to the future. They're not looking to replace their income right now through cash flow. They're looking to buy a good investment that can pay for itself and move on. The other side of that is I work with a lot of fix and flippers as well. That's probably now the bulk of it. And my biggest client was actually new when I met with him 2 years ago. We met over Facebook. So if you want to work with real estate investors, I don't know in y'all's market if you have a ton of like Facebook groups going on with wholesale deals or just investor chatter, but I started engaging in those at a really high level. I don't do a lot of posting. I don't work my social media that way. It's just something that I haven't really either found success in or enjoy. But what I do is I comment on a whole bunch of stuff. Any investment property that I see, I'm commenting, I'm asking for the information or I'm giving feedback. And one day this guy sent me a DM and he was like, can you do a CMA on this property? And so I did it. And I'm very analytical about things. That's probably the high C in me is I sent him a pretty detailed analysis of what I thought about the property. And his response was, wow, that's a lot better than any other agent I've talked to. Can we have lunch? And this really changed my point of view on lunch meetings because I have been a very anti-lunch. Like I don't do lunch with people. Um, but I said yes to him for whatever reason. And we met and he was like, I want to flip a house. So my first step was meet the real estate agent. And if you read The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, like that's a good investor's first step. Build your team before you buy a property.
Hmm.
And so he did his first deal, and then he did another one, and then he did another one. And this year we've done 40 together.
Yeah, that's a lot of deals. One, I added a question in the chat just because one of the biggest things that's helped me work with investors is working with wholesalers. And you had made a note about wholesalers. And so I kind of wanted to ask a question to the group if anybody's worked with wholesalers, because I do know some agents are super against them. And I kind of want to change your mentality a little bit and like think a little bit differently, because agents can work with them. There is a workaround. We can get paid as well working with wholesalers. I don't know if you also do that, Landon, but like wholesalers send me deals and then I send them to my clients as well. And the wholesalers enjoy working with me. So sometimes I will get the deals before they'll even send them out to other clients. And if a wholesaler can't sell the property, since they like me, who do they refer when they need to list it? So there's some opportunities there if you guys haven't worked with wholesalers and want to work with investors to generate those relationships as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's a really good point. Does anyone have any experience wholesaling themselves or working with wholesalers?
doesn't sound like it.
I don't know the state specifics up there, and it varies state to state on people's opinions of wholesaling, the state's opinions of wholesaling. But kind of my perspective when it comes to wholesalers is they are a very crucial part of our real estate ecosystem. If you think about
Mhm.
in nature, like you have a lot of different aspects to make the world go round. Wholesalers help make the world go round. They're doing the lead generation for
Mhm.
us. They're contacting sellers of properties that agents don't want to list. Like, who wants to list a $30,000 property? Not many people. These wholesalers are willing to find these motivated sellers. They're willing to get them to pre-agree to a sales price, get them under contract to sell the property, and then they're putting them out to investors for a profit, but good wholesalers are already building those numbers in. And so a lot of the times, like it's a layup. The
Hmm.
highest commissions that I've made are on wholesale deals. So an easy way for me to get my transaction up, and this is my opinion with real estate investors too, and I'm very transparent with the real estate investors that I work with, is I'm helping you make money. So I expect to make money too. If I'm bringing you a $50,000 property that you're going to make $50,000 on, $1,500 isn't an appropriate commission. Most of those are like $10,000 commissions,
Hmm.
which on a percentage basis, that's like 20%. So
Hmm.
wholesalers are really important to the real estate investing ecosystem. When you're working with investors, this is one thing that I've noticed that I think really sets my team apart and being a go-to resource for investors in our market is we only send properties to investors that actually fit their needs. So the easiest way to get an investor to not take you seriously is send them every deal in the market because someone else said it was a deal. So I do my own research. I attach my opinion to it, and then I'll only send properties to my investor clients if I truly believe it fits with their needs.
Hmm. Does anybody here currently work with investors, or at least one, or anything like that? Amy, you don't in the cities? Okay, I was like, in the cities there's so much opportunity. Um, So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to even raise your hand or put them in the chat. If you guys are wanting to work with investors, or just have some different questions, because um, Landon works with investors on a much larger scale than I do. I work with a lot of the green investors, but they do take a lot more time. And I agree with what he said a little bit too, is like there is a lot more liability um, with running numbers for investors at some point. One thing I've learned is like you have to say it's an opinion a lot because like you don't know what's behind the walls. If you want to go maybe talk a little bit about like when you're running numbers for your investors, maybe like examples of like when it's gone really well, or maybe even an example of it hasn't gone well.
I In all honesty, I haven't had one that hasn't gone well. But we do a ton of research on them as well. And we're very conservative when we run after repair values. We're really conservative, like aiming high when we're talking about rehab budgets. So having a contractor is really helpful to be able to help estimate those things. As real estate agents, we have a specific job description, and we have to be very careful not to cross that line into someone else's job description. And so I talk about this a lot here locally. I don't know if y'all have crawl spaces up there, but it drives me bananas when an agent crawls underneath a house because you're crossing that threshold into something that you are not. You're not a home inspector. You're not a contractor. I am a contractor, and I still tell my clients, like, unless you're hiring me as your GC, I'm not getting underneath that house because I got my real estate agent hat on, and my job here is to help you make the best decision on the purchasing side of things. If we want to do inspections, let's do inspections. A lot of the properties that we buy are in such disrepair, there's no point in inspections though. And so it's just about making sure that the rehab budget is backed by somebody, or let the investor do all of their own research just depending on how experienced they are. But
Mhm.
the I have seen deals go bad, and where deals go bad is the investor is taking someone else's word for it and not doing their own independent research. They're not finding proof that, and this is the dark side of the wholesalers is they'll tell you a property is worth $300,000 after it's fixed up, but they have not one shred of evidence to back that. Maybe they pulled a comp from 5 miles away that doesn't even
Mhm.
look like it. They have absolutely no responsibility. They have absolutely no guidelines preventing them from doing
Mhm.
it because it's on the investor. So when we're sending those as agents, it's really important that we do our own comps. And if we don't have good comps, I'll tell the clients that. Like I really don't know. My gut says one thing, but we really need to dive in and see if this fits your needs. If I don't have a high level of confidence that this pencils out for the investor, I won't send it, or I might send it and just tell them that there's a lot of guesswork involved in this. But see, my goal is 5 deals a year with an investor. The reason I love working with investors is because I'm not going to have to wait 5 to 7 years for them to be another transaction. I'm going to wait like maybe 5 months. They're only going to come back to me if the deal before that worked. And the second I send a bad deal, I no longer have that client.
How many investors do you work with like at one time?
Usually I like to limit my client count. This is another reason why I like to work with investors that do volume is because I have big unit goals, but I can only manage so much at once. And the hardest thing to manage is people, not transactions. And so I really don't like to have more than like 5 or 6 clients at once that are actively moving around. Doesn't mean I have an investor list of about 250 investors that if I don't know exactly who this investment is for, I have them all tagged in my Brivity database as investor. Maybe I even have them tagged as buy and hold or fix and flip so that I can send it to the right people. But I'll just send those properties to a list and see who
Mhm.
responds. And that will also kind of help rise some investors up. There's a lot of like investors that would love a deal, but they're looking for the unicorn deals. And so I have them
Mhm.
tagged and I'm sending them deals as I get them. But those investors that are really serious that want to do multiple a year that can really articulate their what I call a buy box. So if your
Mhm.
criteria fits in this box, you better buy it. If you don't, then we need to rediscuss what your priorities are because I don't want to be sending deals that don't fit what you actually want. And if you're saying no to something that fits that criteria, then there's a disconnect.
Um, so what, so when you're like creating your investor list, one thing that I guess take a step back. Sorry, I had a few questions in my head and it was jumbled up. Have you ever used Bigger Pockets at all, like getting started or connecting with investors?
Yes and no. This was a big mistake on my part. I got involved with Bigger Pockets back in 2018. And that is where I got the most amount of tire kickers, these aspirational investors. And
Hmm.
for me, you have to, but way before all of these NAR rules, my rule has been you have to sign an agency agreement with me for me to work with you. In North Carolina, we have two types of those. We have exclusive agency and we have non-exclusive agency.
Do you still have that?
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh,
And
interesting.
what that means is exclusive means if you buy a house, I am owed commission. Therefore, we are exclusive with each other. Non-exclusive means if someone else sends you a property and you buy it and don't bug me about it, do it. I don't want to cut you off from other real estate agents in the market. However, if you come to me for advice or if I send you a property or I'm involved whatsoever, that contract requires that I receive compensation for it. And so that's always been kind of my stance with investor clients. And I do non-exclusive with my investors because I don't want them to lose out on a deal that someone else owns. So another agent has
Hmm.
an off-market property that really fits their needs. This was very, very attractive to the big investors that I have now. That 40 unit investor, I just put together with another one of my investors that have really high hopes. And this guy was like, I need more money. And this guy was like, I need more deals. And so I put them together. and they now have a goal to do 100 flips in a single year with us next year. Um, but for him, when I explained that agency aspect of it, it was like that was very attractive. He was like, this guy gets investors. We can't tie their hands behind their back and prevent them from buying something else that keeps investors out. However, if I got to put miles on my vehicle to go out and look at these properties for you, we're going to be exclusive. Most of the investment work I do is from my desk. I rarely actually go out to the properties until we're under contract. Um,
Hmm.
but I always get them up front to sign that agreement. That puts me to work, that protects me, and then we don't have to have this weird conversation when the property has come up.
Yeah, similar to kind of what you're saying is like exclusive and non-exclusive. We don't have that option in South Dakota, and I don't know if you guys have those options in the other states that you guys are in. What I've done is I've done like an A investor and a B investor, where like an A investor signed exclusive agency with me. And so if they've signed exclusive agency with me, they get first, like first dibs of like the best deals. And if they're kind of the wishy-washy, not like they're working with multiple agents, like they're just not committed, they'll get like the leftovers, I guess is the best way for me to put it. Because like
Yeah.
to me, we're also in a much smaller area. Um, so like the commitment, I'm looking for that commitment, especially working with investors, but they also know if they find a wholesale deal or if they find an off-market property, I'm not going to hold them back
Yeah.
from a
And
deal.
to answer your bigger pockets question,
Mhm.
um, I was involved early and I got a lot of these agents, I mean, these investors that like ideally we would like to buy a house, but they wanted to go out and look at 15 properties and weren't willing to commit. And so
Mhm.
I had too many of those experiences early on that I just got completely out of bigger pockets. I have a really good friend that came into the business about 2 years after I did that he went all in on bigger pockets and he consistently does about $10 million a year in volume that stemmed from relationships that he had with bigger pockets early on. But he was engaging a lot more. The community was much more small when I was there. Had I just stuck
Mhm.
through it and instead of writing off the whole platform versus individual investor by individual investor, I can only imagine where my business would be. So I have recently gotten back into bigger pockets, but now I have a bunch of catch up as far as content and engagement. And there's established agents that get leads from there. But I would still say there are probably 4 or 5 agents in our market that get leads on bigger pockets and then refer them to me because they don't actually want to work with the investor, but they just get the leads.
Yeah, we used to get leads from bigger pockets, and I might get back on it because they were some of them were decent leads, and then some of them were actually what I didn't like about it is they were actually people I knew that were just trying to find me on bigger pockets. So they would find me and then submit an inquiry on my page, and then bigger pockets would count it as a lead towards me. And I was like, I already knew them. Like they were looking
Yeah.
specific because nobody in my market pays for leads on bigger pockets. Um, but if you guys don't know
Bigger
what
pockets
bigger
will
pockets
refund you.
is,
They'll refund you for
they
those if you let them know
yeah,
that
I was fighting them about it and it was just confusing. So I just canceled for it then. Um, but if you guys don't know what bigger pockets is, I do recommend looking into it. Because it is great information on investment properties. Just be careful on what they're teaching you because exactly what Landon's talking about, like they kind of create tire kickers a little bit with like over analyzing and having these investors almost over analyze every property where they don't act fast enough because the good investments are they don't sit there
Yeah. And the bigger
long enough to be
pockets
able to
like
work through
claim
it.
to fame, what got them really going was teaching investors how to invest with no money.
Hmm.
And what I found though is that strategy is super possible, but the people that take advantage of it are experienced investors, not new, because they have the credibility to go ask their friends and family for the money. The money comes from
Mhm.
somewhere. It doesn't just come out of thin air and magically you have a house. So you have to be experienced and you have to either be able to hustle friends and family and get them to believe in you without proof of concept, or you put a few deals under your belt. It took me, I got into the business in 2017. I flipped my first house in 2017. And it took me until this year for my dad to call me and been like, okay, you've been doing this long enough. I trust you. I'd like to invest with you now.
Mhm.
That's my own dad. So like it takes a while to build up those people outside of you and their confidence that um investing together is a smart move, not a favor, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're almost to 9:30, and I guess if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand because we'll end here with a couple questions. But Landon, the last question I have for you. So we do have a few new agents on here. What are some tips that you would recommend for new agents that might that would be to maybe to get started working with investors, like how to find maybe their first investor or to feel confident working with investors?
Yeah, so confidence is key. Um, and what I would suggest first thing is like get knowledgeable about what real estate investing actually is and the various reasons why someone invests. Understand and be able to underwrite an investment. And what that means is if it's a fix and flip, you got to be able to understand and run comps on what could this house be worth on a general scale, like what would it cost to renovate the property? And there's a couple equations that we use, like when I'm evaluating an investment for myself. So we flip about one house a month, a little bit less than that this year, but our goal was to do about one house a month this year so that we can do two next year. I'm taking my conservative after repair value, ARV, and I am taking 30% off of it. So if I think the house is going to be worth 200,000, I'm doing 200,000 times point 0.7 minus the rehab costs. And that's what I'm willing to pay for a property. So understanding some of those, but it first gets like really confident in if you're listing houses for sellers, it's the same thing. You just have to be able to see beyond the mess of the house that you're looking at and comp it with
Mhm.
how it could look. When you can get really good at that, you can start talking to investors about these things. The easiest way to get in with investors, though, I would say, is engage in Facebook groups that are about investing. If you find deals on your MLS that could be a good rental property or could be a good flip opportunity, like share them into those groups. If you have a seller or a client or your team has a potential seller that might be willing to sell that could make a good investment, like share those things with the community. And the idea is to build your list. So
Mhm.
get their phone numbers, get their email addresses. Um, it's a really easy thing too. Like if you just play around in those Facebook groups, when someone posts a property, at least in my group, there's like 50 comments that are all people just openly giving their email addresses. I keep those. That's like free leads for me. So
Mhm.
everyone that dropped their email in someone else's post is now my lead. I may not have their phone number, but I got their email address. So now I can put them on an investor list and I can send them our stuff. Another one would be is like reach out to agents in your market that are working with investors and see what they're doing, how they're winning. Every busy agent gets good leads that they don't have time for. So an easy way to get investors is to get those referrals. There are also a lot of agents that won't touch investors, and that's been really good for me because I've positioned myself as kind of like an investor first real estate agent. And so I have agents in our own market that have wealthy investors that like they aren't confident enough. They sell $1 million homes. They don't have time or they don't have the desire to work with the investments. And so they'll send them my way. So just network the same way that you would really go out and try and find a buyer or a seller and have consultations. How I learned my language was I would get on a call with them. Tell me about your investment goals. The best question that I've ever learned to ask is how, if you buy a property, how would you like it to perform? And you'll start learning like how investors talk. Typically, if an investor can't answer that question, they're much newer and you might have to help them like through that question. But your experienced ones will tell you exactly how they want it to perform, and no investment is going to be the same. So having that knowledge, how do you want your investments to perform, really answer all of the other questions that you would have. Are they a fix and flip investor? Are they a buy and hold? I have some people that are like, if the mortgage will cover it, or if I need to bring $300 to the table a month, but the mortgage will cover everything else, and you have a high level of confidence that it would appreciate X% year over year, that's for me. I don't do a lot of those investors, but those are great because there are so many opportunities for them. And they're typically the investors that are looking in higher price points and just waiting to sell the property in 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. My last question is, do you have like a list or a checklist that you use for fix and flips?
Not really. I have a general contracting team down here in North Carolina, so we're very turnkey with our investors. But what do you mean by a checklist for fix and flips?
So like for me, like just kind of going, so something I could just like send my investors and be like, okay, hey, we have accounted for everything. Does that make sense? Like we've accounted for flooring, we've accounted for light fixtures, we've accounted for electrical. Kind of just that like checklist. So like when we're submitting the offer, we're not like, oh crap, we forgot to account for something small and it's not
I got
small
you.
type of
So
thing.
like a budget worksheet.
Yeah.
We actually have just ripped off like with hard money lenders in our area, they want that filled out. So we just have a
Hmm.
spreadsheet that we stole from one of them that we send to the investor. And I would like in that regard, I would send something like that to the investor and have them fill it out.
Yeah.
That's where you can
That's what I
really
want to
protect
do.
yourself liability wise. For us, a lot of the times I do the renovations. And so I just give them an upfront quote. And my deal with them is this is guaranteed unless there's something that wouldn't be like can't be seen through a walkthrough. So this is your rehab price.
Would you be willing to share the one? We don't have hard money lenders where we're at. Would
Interesting.
you be willing to share that? Yeah. So if you guys know any hard money lenders that'd be willing to invest in South Dakota, um, I'm looking for one. I have a deal, but I'm looking for a hard money lender right now. Um, So, but anyway, if there are no other questions, Landon, thank you so much for your time today. You have a lot of knowledge when it comes to investors. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can connect you guys with Landon. He is with Place, if you can't tell. He's got the get up on today, in North Carolina. So thank you again, Landon. If you guys need anything, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, I'll let you guys have a wonderful Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye,
Thanks for
guys.
having me.